Olivera here, and we're very happy, as I already said. Many of you may know that in 1999 and 2000, Bechtel Corporation tried to privatize the water supply in Cochabamba, Bolivia, and the working people in Cochabamba had other ideas. And by the tens of thousands, they successfully drove Bechtel out, and furthermore, drove back Bechtel's attempts at getting, remuneration for their lost profits. So this was in 2000, and now we are in 2013. So I won't make that joke, water under the bridge, but it is an interesting time to see what has happened shortly after the water wars, which Marcela played a key role in, along with her brother Oscar Olivera, in the Coalition for the Defense of Water and Life, and also in the Federation of Factory Workers. Shortly after that, Evo Morales was elected president. And I think it's fair to say, although Marcela will correct me if I'm wrong, that the water wars played a big role in his acceding to the presidency. And it's interesting now, 13 years later, to see how that has all played out for the people. So I think Marcela will speak for herself. We're very happy to welcome her here to Troy. So thank you for coming.
This is not made for Bolivians, but more for other people. Thank you very much, Nancy and John, also for bringing me here. I owed this visit because we had to cancel the first time, so I'm very happy to be here with you all. And it feels a community here, and it feels more a community than sometimes we feel it at home. And we always have an eye on what's going on in the south, but I feel like people like you are doing also important things here in the north, and you should look more at what you guys are doing rather than what's going on in the south sometimes. Anyway, I'll start a little bit with what happened in Cochabamba, as Nancy was telling us at the beginning. What happened there in 1999 and 2000, and I want to start with that picture because that's our slogan, and it means the water is ours, damn it. So Cochabamba is the place where I come from, and it's in the middle of South America, and it has the Andes today. Some people were asking me how it is there, but we have all kinds of ecosystems. But in Cochabamba, where I live, which is, it has all that population, the last years we have been suffering lack of water. And it has several causes. It's not just, that it's not raining enough, the climate is changing, but it's also mainly caused by what we call neoliberalism, because people have been migrating to the cities, and the cities have grown so much, and it's very hard to keep up with that. Anyway, so in 1999, our government decided to sign a contract with a corporation from the United States. It was a consortium, but the main owner was a corporation from the United States called Bechtel. And you can see in the picture that our, that time, President Hugo Banzer, who was a former dictator also, it's very happy signing, and they are all celebrating this contract. What was going on with this contract is that all the water, the public system that supplies of water to the city, suddenly it was privatized, and it was going to go to this company. And they have huge profits, and all the loan that the company had before suddenly disappeared because they want to make it more attractive for the private company. Anyway. So they did that, but at the same time, they also approved legislation on water. And this legislation was terrible because it was privatizing and taking all the water sources from hands of the farmers and communities and putting that on the state. So the state will be able to give concessions. So if some community wanted to keep managing their water, they had to ask permission to the state, and the state will see if they can manage that. So it was practically a privatization of water in all senses, not just the public entity, but also the water sources. So anyway, just weeks after the new company took over our water system, the price of water went up. And it wasn't like we were getting much water, more water than before, or that the water had more quality. No, it was just, the greedy company that wanted to make money and wanted to invest in the water supply of Cochabamba, taking the money from our pockets. So we said, well, that's not going to happen. And then there were a series of events. I'm going to go fast to this part because I don't think we need to go in detail. But we called for mobilizations during all that time. And 4th and 5th of February, we had one big mobilization, and the government was a little bit scared because too many people on the streets, and it lasted 2 days, and many people were hurt, and so the government decided to froze the water bills and created a commission for the people from the city and all sorts of politicians to review the contract and to review the legislation. But the government was just trying to earn some time. Then people will get tired, so we can go ahead with that stuff. So anyway, nothing happened, and we called to other mobilization, and this was even bigger. Every time the mobilizations were growing and growing and growing. So in April 2000, we had this huge thing on the city. It lasted like more than a week. The whole city was shut down. No cars can come or go, from the apartment, and it was spreading out in the whole country, because this legislation was affecting also to all Bolivian sources. It wasn't just Cochabamba, but the rest of the country. So there were already uprisings in El Altiplano and in other parts. So and suddenly the demands of the people were not just that the contract should be cancelled and the legislation, should be changed, but it was more like, I think the government has to leave, because this is our government. So people were already talking about, we're going further with the demands. So the government got scared, and they decided to end up the contract and change the legislation according to the demands of the people. A 17-year-old kid was killed on the streets. And that's when the government realized they were making a mistake, and it was sort of a victory. That's what we thought in that time, but it was a sour victory because many people were hurt, and this kid died, and then we had many other problems. This is the romantic part of the story. We went to the streets, we fought, and we won. But there are also other problems still happening right now. This is a little of information about what was this consortium. So you can see the owner was Bechtel. And what is Bechtel? Just for you, who was behind these corporations? So they have a lot of economic power, but also they have a lot of political power because they are very linked to the government. They have business with the government, and I feel like our states suddenly have been taken by corporations, not just the U.S. government, but also, the governments in the South also have been taken by corporations, and corporations are the ones that rule right now. This is a very nice quote from Mr. Stephen Bechtel, that, you can see the logic of the private sector, behind public services. That's why we have to oppose to the privatization of public services. because they are not there to provide water, they are there to make money. And that's what it is. It's otherwise there will be probably, I don't know, community center or something else, but no, those are corporations that want to make profit. So anyway, this is the story, this is what happened in Cochabamba. When this happened in April 2000, we thought that was something that was going on just in Bolivia. And when we start to look around, we realized that no, this is happening in South Africa, this was happening in Peru, it was going on in England. It's not just a question, it's not an issue that happens in the south, but also in the north. In England, the water system was privatized too, and I don't know if you know this, but in poor neighborhoods they put these very infamous water meters, prepaid water meters, where people have to go and buy a card, and if you have to put the code of the card, and if you don't do that, you don't get water. So there are all these horrible, logic behind water privatization. Anyway, when all of this happened in Bolivia, we realized that it was going on in other parts too. And so I'll go a little bit on that in relationship to our continent. So this is some of what's happening or what has happened also in the Americas. We come we came out from governments that were dictators into these new elected democratic governments, and so it was people, governments without money because the previous governments got huge debts, and the World Bank and the IMF are behind of them, telling them you have to privatize because you don't have money, and if you need, if you want a loan from us, you have to privatize. So anyway, those are that's how we are right now, and I feel like we were too. I'll go a little bit of what's going on with water issues in the rest of the continent. If this battle in Cochabamba was won on the streets, there was this other very important battle won on the offices. In Uruguay in October 2004, people seeing what happened in Cochabamba decided to organize themselves, and they create a coalition for the defense of water and life. It had the same name that in Bolivia. And if you look into Chile and Colombia, you're going to find a lot of coalitions for the defense of water and life. And so they campaigned for a referendum to make an amendment in the Constitution and to declare water is a human right. So that will help and prevent water privatization. Part of the company in Uruguay was already privatized during the time when they campaigned for that. And at the same time that this referendum was happening, also was being elected the leftist president in Uruguay that time. And he said, when he was running for president, he said, if I get elected, I'm going to make this, this happen. So anyway, he was elected. And then he was a little bit scared, and he said, it's going to be from now on. So, all the private companies that are in Uruguay can still be here. And from now on, nothing is going to be privatized. And people said, no, we're going to do it well. So they kicked out also a corporation from Uruguay. And I feel it was, I have my issues with this water as a human right, because I feel like it's a tool that has limitations, but it helped in Uruguay actually to win a very important battle. But this is also in relationship to water utilities. What's going on in Uruguay right now? It's if we're gonna see along the rest of what I'm gonna show you, that it's not anymore about privatizing water utilities, but it's privatizing water in general. So what's happening in Uruguay with this, very progressive Mujica government is that they are starting to look into extractive industries as a source for, new incomes in the government. And what not many people know is that these industries use a lot of water. So, when they are prioritizing mining or extractive industries, they are forgetting people. So water as a human right doesn't work when the priorities are different. So in Peru, there was a long battle for almost 15 years to not allow the privatization of water utilities either, and the Inter-American Development Bank was very involved in pushing water privatization in Peru. And I think the workers there, there's this federation of public water workers in Peru were very successful resisting that. And they've done very well. However, the same that in Peru and a little bit that in Bolivia, the privatization of water is going beyond the public utility. So they have this huge gold mining and copper project in the region of Cajamarca in Peru. And it has been, when Ollanta was, you're going to see that the issue of water is very linked to broader political issues. So when people are running for Congress or when they are running for to be president, they usually use water to gain some political favor. And the same happened in Peru. Ollanta Humala promised that this project was not going to go if he was elected. So he was elected, and he's saying, well, I think the project has to go. And so they change, their minds once they are in power. So anyway, there is this huge project, and those are, campesinos, farmers there that are opposing to that, and that's, a huge battle going on right now there. So Ecuador, in Ecuador also we have this very progressive government, Rafael Correa, but in Ecuador actually it was the second country in the Americas where they start to talk about water as a human right, but they went further and they said, well, nature has rights. So they put that, nature, Mother Earth has rights also in their constitution, and they went beyond on that. But and it's considered a very progressive constitution, the one in Ecuador. But there are problems there too, because the economy in Ecuador is based on extractive industries again. There's a lot of mining going on there, a lot of gas and oil. And the past year there was this huge mobilization in Ecuador that lasted like 2 weeks. They left a certain part of Ecuador, they walked for 2 weeks, and it started on the International Women's Day, and it went to and it concluded in the International Water Day. So there were for 2 weeks these people walking in defense of water, land, and what they call dignity. So you can see that a lot of issues are also involved on that. It's not just about water, but it's also about land, and it's about other things. So Argentina. In Argentina, this huge water corporation, Suez, that is very famous, was expelled from Buenos Aires, Mendoza, and Santa Fe. Some groups of workers and also the community took charge of these water utilities, and with a lot of effort are making them run. But there are other, other challenges there, like fracking, for example, that has become really a huge issue right now in Argentina. I remember that when President Kirchner, when she nationalized the oil industry, everybody was very happy because they're kicking one corporation. But the problem is that they are still continuing with the same policies than previous governments. So it's not fracking where a corporation is under control, is controlling all of that, but it's more the state is doing all this with the help of corporations still. So there's a lot of problems in Argentina. A lot of unions have organized around this issue and are fighting fracking, I think, very successfully. Well, in El Salvador, you know, and I think Nancy will correct me if I say something wrong. In El Salvador, there is also this, you know, this political party that was, you know, social movement once won the elections there, and they are, you know, inspired by what happened in Ecuador and in Bolivia also, where we have also declared that water is a human right. They have pushed for constitutional reforms, but you know, for 7 years of water legislation that was worked by social movements and groups, organizations of many kinds, it has been stopped. The past August, there was a huge mobilization in El Salvador asking for, you know, the right wings to stop, to block passing this legislation, and, you know, to move on some things that are important. So that's a battle that's happening right now in El Salvador, and you know, there are a lot of mining there too. So I'll talk a little bit about Mexico. You know, the water utility there was also that serves like 20 million people in Mexico was also trying to be privatized. What they have found, or what they are doing right now, instead of privatizing in the classic sense, you know, just giving that to a corporation, what they do is they cut parts of the process to deliver water, and they privatize those parts. They sort of terciarización. So, for example, the process to deliver water goes to, you know, to getting water from sources, and then it goes to the pipes and the billing. So what they do is actually they privatize certain parts of this process. You know, like the billing, for example, the company doesn't do the billing anymore. They give that to some, you know, private entity. So they have been doing that a lot. So there is a sort of underground privatization there. But anyway, a couple of years ago, they are also, you know, start to push for the right to water in their constitution, and they grant that. There is that long list of coalitions in Mexico that work for that to happen, and but now the same coalition that, you know, could put that in their constitution now is fighting because the government is also thinking on doing fracking in Mexico. You know what fracking is, right? Because you were dealing with that here. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about Colombia. In Colombia, there was also this huge movement to put amendments in the constitution that talk about the right to water and all of that. See, yes.
Forgive me. In the previous slide, there was some text on the left. Was that part of the Constitution?
Yes, that's
so
the part of the
constitutional right to.
the right to water. Yeah, that's what they achieved. So that's written in the Constitution now. So anyway, in Colombia, you're going to see that a lot of the movements in what has been happening is that people are trying to prevent water privatization in some way. So they are trying to go one step ahead than the corporation. So that's why there are a lot of efforts to prevent water privatization, and they work a lot on the Constitution and, you know, legislation to prevent that. So the same happened in Colombia. In 2007, there was this huge, large coalition that decided to put that in place. They organized sailings into the main rivers in Colombia, because Colombia has a lot of rivers. So they were going, one town, stopping in each town and talking with the people about the importance of water and all of that. But all of that got stuck in the bureaucracy of the government. The government didn't let the law pass, didn't go further away, because there was huge pressure from the World Bank on some other type of legislation. So in Colombia, the movement got is mobilized. There's a lot of mining also going on. So there are all these, seems like there are all these things coming, and people do not know exactly to which issue fight first. I'll talk a little bit about Bolivia. In April 2000, Evo Morales, our actual president, was on the streets like all of us, fighting against the corporation, throwing stones. There are very famous pictures of him, on the streets. And the cocaleros were certainly a big and an important part of the fighting this privatization in Cochabamba. And it's certainly truth that that victory that we had almost 14 years now opened the door for social movements to take state power, and that's what we did. But everybody will think, oh yeah, so everything is solved because they have this very nice and progressive government, but it's not like that. So that's a piece of a letter that the social movement sent it to him in 2009, because he's pushing for a legislation that is taking the decision about water issues from the communities and from the people, and is putting that on the state. And why we see the state sometimes like an enemy? We see the state probably in a different way than you see it, because our countries have a very strong tradition of autonomy. Because the state was absent since almost always, people have learned to do things with their own hands. So if people are not sitting down on the fields waiting for the government to give them water, so people go and build their own water systems. So there is this, or if the schools do not arrive there, people will create their own schools, and I think that has been happening, for example, with the Landes movement in Brazil. The same happened in Ecuador with the CONAIE. The CONAIE went and created universities. So there are a lot of this very strong tradition of, we're not waiting, we're doing that with our own hands. So when the state comes and tries to take control of something that has been created by the community, that's when the problems start. So anyway, we have these issues with right now with a lot of extractive industry also in Bolivia, a lot of oil mining happening, and our government is also starting to think on fracking too. So what has been happening in Latin America? So when we are talking about water systems, we will say that there has been a huge movement that has kicked out all these corporations, and I feel like that's a huge victory. But at the same time, there are all these other threats that are coming into our countries, like mining, oil, gas industries, and that's water bottle. In the case of Mexico, for example, is a very huge issue because the water there is not good. So they make us believe that the water bottle is something that's going to save our problems instead of putting investment in the public systems. So anyway, there are these. I think we have gone further, kicking out corporations and trying to keep water in public hands. But at the same time, we have lost on other issues. No, we're still fighting some things. There are these very beautiful phrase from the Ecuadorians, because the Ecuadorians also took power, state power at some point. The indigenous people went there and took power at some point. They have this very beautiful phrase that says, "We won, but we lost." So, and I feel like in the case of Latin America, it's a little bit like that. We have won, but at the same time, we have lost. And maybe to understand this better, we have to see what has been the process. What's happening right now, rather than seeing in terms of victories or failures, but more in seeing what people are doing to resist those things in their daily life. But it's not all bad and not just about resistance. But I feel like movements have been becoming very creative, trying to find other ways to do things. One lesson from the water war in Bolivia is that, we shouldn't be just good throwing stones. We shouldn't be good just saying no to something. We have to say yes to something. And I feel like that's also a self-critique to the movement in general, because we easily say no to this. We don't want this, but what do we want? So are we creating the alternatives that we need to create? And I feel like we haven't been doing very well in that time and on that area, but I think we can. So in Latin America, for example, we're working on trying to recover some traditional ways to do things. So there is this initiative from some people about, how the people in the Andes managed the water before the Spanish were here. So trying to recover traditional ways to manage water that are based in the community and not relate so much on the state. There are this other thing called public utility partnerships that, the World Bank comes with a recipe that is public-private partnerships, because the World Bank finally has admitted that privatization doesn't work. So they talk about, okay, let's do something where the state is there, but also private companies are going to put some money. So they call that public-private partnership. And we are saying no, we can do this too with public entities. So we are working with this very important and huge water utility in Uruguay, which is public and controlled by the state, and doing helping other water utilities in other parts of Latin America, like in Peru, and this has been proved also very to be very effective. I also feel like climate change is a huge opportunity for us to organize ourselves around bigger issues. Because it's not just about pollution or privatization, but it's also about what's going on with work, labor issues. It can help to put together, I feel, unions, but also social movements together. And I don't think that has been happening enough right now. I feel like unions are separated from environmental issues, and I think climate change can be an opportunity to work together with unions and new social movements. I want to go there, but I think I have said that, but that's something that's happening, and I'm gonna finish here because I feel like I'm better with questions and answers than just talking myself. But I want to finish with a really nice phrase that I think expresses what water is, and why we should be defending it, and why we should be working more around that, because there's no one single human or animal life in this planet that can live without water. Everything is water. So anyway, thank you. Yeah.
Could you explain why you think water as a human right has a problem as a...
I feel it was the Bolivian government who pressed for this convention at the UN to put, that water is a human right. And again, I feel like in places where there is a lot of indigenous people, and the case of Ecuador and Bolivia, for example, is taking away the decisions around water from the hands to the community, and is putting that on the state or the lawyers. Who's gonna resolve conflicts at the end, or who's gonna take charge of providing water? According to the right to water, it should be the state, the one that has to provide water to the people. And in some communities are saying, no, we don't want the state to regulate, what we have created with our own hands. And so and also the state, again, prioritizes other industries or issues. And so I feel like it's pretty much a rhetoric, and also it gives an excuse to the state to take over, to make decisions for the people. And I think those decisions should be, made by the people. So it's, I feel like it's probably it's pretty much clear here, the right to water, because I think the notion of citizenship is very well defined. You have a social security number, you have a bank account, so you're a citizen, you can vote. But in places like in Bolivia, there are indigenous people that don't have an ID, don't have, is that a citizen person? Can you consider that a citizen? And also, indigenous communities have a different way to manage water, and I think it's something that we have to try to understand, even if it doesn't make sense from our Western point of view sometimes. Yeah.
Isn't that this privatization of water consistent with the history of governments giving resources that were commonly owned to business interests, and by doing that increasing the disparity of wealth because these businesses enjoy more assets when they're given resources that is in the ground or under the ocean or lands, and it's got to be taken away from somebody. So you see that as, this is being, the water issue being part of that bigger problem?
Yeah, well, there is that, I don't know if you have heard about Garrett Hardin, I think, that talks about the tragedy of the commons. So, it's like, people do not know how to manage things, so let's make somebody manage that for them. And I feel like this has been used as an excuse to, expropriate our rights to decide. And yeah, it is like that. It's absolutely like that. Yeah.
What do you see in the movement that you're part of? How do you see the role of the state to be?
I think the state is an instrument. It's a tool. It could be good sometimes, and it could be bad sometimes. And I think Bolivia has been a lab for, you can see everything has happened in Bolivia. We have had everything, dictators, we have, revolts, we have corporations, presidents, and they have, suffered everything. And we have been, I think, in all the stages that possible stages that we could be. And I definitely feel from the last experience, having Evo Morales in power, a friend, a person, a compañero, that was with us on the streets and all of that better than the state is the community. Mm-hmm. It's in the community where we can make real change, and we can, improve our lives, and we can organize things. We can, I feel like we shouldn't have too much. We shouldn't put too much our eyes on the state, but more into what we are doing daily in the places where we live and the places where we work. That's where I feel like it's not in taking state power anymore. I don't feel like that's where we should be, because there's enough empirical evidence that proves that that's not the way to change things. It's on the streets, it's people in movement. Yeah.
In my reading, I keep coming across this term that defies a short translation, and it's buen vivir.
Mm-hmm.
And I read that in many contexts, which comes out as good living or good life, but I don't think that explains the concept of this. Could you say a little bit about that? I mean, what is that, and what does that mean to people?
Yeah, it's to live in a different way. It's to have enough to live the day. It's not to worry about what's going to happen in 5 years, or I have to have to get some stuff to, to die, and and I also feel like that notion that we have to make sure we're sure, it's sad, because it's an indication that we have lost faith in into our community, that our community is going to take care of us. So how can we recover that? I think the notion of vivir bien, or the well-being, is that, is the fact that you're part of something, and some things are going to be taken care by members of that community. I feel it's also that, it's not accumulation. That's what capital is, it's accumulate, and no end for that. When it's enough, there's that notion, and the well-being, there is that notion, that enough is what you have to pass the day. And it's living in a different way that they have taught us that we should be living. It's not, I wouldn't conceptualize that, but more I will say it's a way of, it's a practice. It's a way of living. It's what you do every day. Ladies first.
You talked a little bit about your disappointment, I guess, in terms of Morales' now position regarding kind of centralization of power regarding the water. Mm-hmm. Could you elaborate a little bit more in terms of how you think he's doing more broadly? Can you situate that particular example in terms of how you think he's functioning as a president? Are you completely disenchanted with what he's doing, or is this the only problem you have with what he's doing? Could you just elaborate a little bit more in terms of someone who was in the streets with these throwing rocks, and now you're having this issue with him? Is it complete disenchantment, or just one, just a little bit more elaboration?
It's just not just Morales, but I feel like all the so-called pink tide, has been like that in Latin America. They have taken power. Some of them have some social background. Others, like Correa, don't have any. But like Morales, he comes from a social movement. He belongs to a union. But I feel like they are doing exactly the same things that the neoliberal governments were doing. The same policies, all based on extractivism. But I will say
Extractivism. Extracting.
Oh, extracting. Okay.
Yeah.
So those are the same policies, but they come with a different rhetoric, which makes it more dangerous. Because they are talking about, we're doing this for the people. People, and in certain ways like that, because there are more revenues, so people are getting more money and all of that, but it's based on a huge economic and ecological impact, and it's sometimes destroying communities, destroying places, and it's for the well-being of everybody. So some of them have to suffer, so we all are fine. So they come with that rhetoric that it's I feel it's damaging, the environment and all of that. But I don't think it's just Morales. I think it's this other. If you look closely what the policies are in our countries right now, you'll see that there's no single difference with what the other ones were doing. And it's even harder for, I will say, social movements, because before we had it clear. We knew who was the bad guy. But now it's like, is Morales the bad guy? It's really, or we're confused, and we are also dismobilized, because how we're gonna mobilize, against this guy who was a friend of us, and they come with also rhetoric of, you're a right-wing person, you are doing what the right-wings are doing. And so there is a lot of criminalization of social movements in Ecuador. If you look at how many people have been in jail for mobilizing against the government, it's like more than 100 people have been incarcerated. The same is happening in Bolivia. They are going behind the people, and not the ones that abuse people. There was this huge repression a couple of years in Bolivia, where they taped the mouths of women there was this huge march of indigenous population against a highway that the Morales government is trying to build that is going to cross the Cat National Park. And it's a highway to pass merchandise from Brazil to Chile. So it's what we were fighting for in the 80s, the FTAA. Remember when we were fighting all against that? So now that's going to happen there because they're building all the infrastructure for this merchandise to go from one side to the other side. So it's all related to market. So the government's trying to build this highway, and people from that national park decided to do a march. It took more than a month to go from one place to the other place. They were very severely repressed, women especially. There were kids, they were old people, and if you can, you see the photographs of that repression, you'll see the police doing horrible things. And 2 years later, no one is in jail for that. The government said, oh, we haven't sent the order for that. So it was like just the police took the initiative to that. So no one is in jail for that. And further than that, the people who mobilize, the main leaders that organize that mobilization have pending trials. So it's, there are these stories that do not come too much here to the north, but because we like to have the hope, that this is going to be different. There are these guys that are making different things, but it's not like that. It's pretty much rhetoric, but real life is a little bit different there. Yes.
You've given us a nice tour of various South American countries and their opposition to privatization of water. I wonder how that works in with so-called fair trade agreements, which are not fair. They don't involve trade, and they aren't agreements in any real sense. But at least some of those countries are involved in fair trade deals. Free trade. Free trade, I'm sorry. I misspoke, but you know what I meant.
Yeah.
Do some of these free trade agreements make it difficult to get rid of the pressure to privatize?
Well, there is actually a lot of public services go into this. Now I'm confused. Free trade agreements. So a lot of that go into that. It's the GATS. That is the general agreements, and I don't know, something like that. But it's called GATS. So a lot of public services go into these packages that for trade agreements. And it's not so much, you will be surprised. It's not so much anymore United States pressuring for that to happen with our countries, but it's moving to other places. Like there's this thing called ADA, that is this free trade agreement, for example, in Central America with Europe. So it's moving, I don't think in the United States it's the empire, and the classical sense anymore. I think it's going on to other countries. But also, again, I don't think we should see it just in terms of geopolitics, not just governments, but corporations, because corporations are behind the governments. And it's, like if you look into what's going on in Brazil, for example, where, we have, you could say, Brazil, Bolivia, Latinos, same part of the world, it could be different, but no, like Brazil is becoming a huge empire, and for the region. And a lot of these free trade agreements are considering public services as a way, to keep privatizing things. So it's making it easier in some cases. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought of a few things that could be added to what W.H. Auden said, as far as getting people more to identify, in the sense that I've got the percentage, but a great percentage of the human body is water. And all life came from water. So maybe some things like that could also be used to get people to really identify with the need to own our water supply and improve it.
I don't know if you have been reading the Masaru Emoto, the hidden messages of water. It's a very interesting book to read because he has this. There's this Japanese guy who made these experiments with water, with crystals of water, and like saying good things to the water and how the crystals, get really nice shapes. But when the words that are given to the same water are like hate or insults, the crystals have an awful shape. You should check into that. It's very, very interesting, but it reminds me so much of what you're saying. It's like if we are 80% water, we should be, treating ourselves also with good words and being gentle and all of that.
Actually, I guess it's sort of interested to hear your reaction. Talking about what's going on around here, actually on the, and maybe somebody here knows a lot more about this than I do. Like in Rockland County, which is about an hour north of New York City, somebody wants to develop more, and it's actually one of the most densely, it's like already pretty maxed out from a development perspective. So water was an issue. And then Suez has stepped in and said that they would build a desalination plant using Hudson River water. And essentially, I would say, and what's really neat is that this little group of, people kind of found out about it. Like it was sort of like the local politicians, this is just my take on it, were trying to sneak it in. And they didn't even allow anybody to be party to it. They really didn't allow much of an environmental impact statement. It was sort of getting to the done deal, already ready to go phase. And people did catch on to it and kind of act up. And then they got some funds, I would say, from Riverkeeper, some of the traditional environmental organizations that have a lot of money. And so far, they actually at least got themselves granted to be a party to this thing. But it was, I have to say, I was like, they're pulling this crap here in the Hudson Valley, an hour from New York City. So, and I think part of the terminology was efficiency, and because they weren't going to have to build any infrastructure, that this was going to be this great thing. But of course, the public was supposed to foot the bill, and then essentially Suez was going to, only take part of the profit or something like that. It was really slick. I mean, they're really slick now, so it's we're not immune.
No, in Detroit, it's a very interesting, well, not interesting, but it's a classical example of what, how privatization can be, in the United States. Because, we usually think, privatization is only happening, but there is a South here too, and
So I'm trying to interpret a couple of things you said, and one thing that I took away from that was that you kept on repeating that indigenous communities were both a form of mobilization to protest and a model for different kinds of control, of power, a model of different ways that indigenous communities could substitute for the state, and that would be a decentralized, almost anarchistic form of control. So I'm wondering your success, and your critique of Morales, who now is the president of all of Bolivia. I was struck with your first slide that Cochabamba is the fourth biggest city with 1.7 million. So he is now sort of the president of this state, including, say, non-indigenous Santa Cruz. Is the problem in part that the sort of mobilization and the models that indigenous communities have for control and power. Someone like Morales says they won't work for the big state. I mean, is it basically a kind of confrontation of different models of power and control, and Morales has given up on his own constituency?
There are two things here. First, they have said that what has been previously happened in Bolivia, before Morales, obviously, is like people were demanding a surplus from the state. So the demands were, the state give me that, or I need this, and they're saying that now that doesn't happen that's not happening anymore, because the state is taking charge of everything and is giving and redistributing the richness. So that's the logic that there is behind that. But the other thing that I want to mention is that, well, when I'm talking about indigenous communities, I'm not just talking about little places where in the countryside where people are working, and it's not like that, because these indigenous communities have migrated to the cities, and they have migrated the community to the cities. So if you look, for example, in La Paz, you're going to see El Alto. It's another city where all of them are migrants. So they are these social movements living in urban spaces. The same in Cochabamba. A lot of migrants have came from the mines and have brought the community into the city. So there are all these autonomous. 60% of the water in Cochabamba is provided by these autonomous water systems. It's people that have created their own systems. Put the pipes here. They work putting them, put their money, their effort. So it's huge. If you look into 60% of that million, blah blah blah. So anyway, how communities work in Bolivia? There's this very beautiful logic. It's called rotation and obligation. So it means that we all have to rotate in the services that we are doing to the community, but we all have the obligation to do that too. So it's there's this nice phrase that my brother says, that we all should be like the water, like transparent and in motion. So when somebody wants to stay in power for so long, and doesn't want to rotate, it's like the water when it gets stuck. It starts to smell bad. So we have to, rotate. And I think these guys that are right now in power, and I know Venezuela is a different case, but you can see also that idea that they do not trust the people once they are in power. They think that people are gonna fuck up. They're gonna do it wrong. So we have to, there is this paternalistic idea that they know better what's best for people, and they are afraid to talk with the people. And I feel like that has happened with Morales, and there are good reasons and bad reasons for that. He was attacked by the right wings, strong, and so he had to create a place where he could defend himself. But at the same time, I feel like he has been for too long in that corner, that he should be, trying to listen more to people. And that's not happening there. And so he has lost that idea of the rotation, that we all have to be moving for the things to work better. Yes?
The movement to change should not support or oppose individuals. One thing makes a point, five make a fist. So what needs to be built is a fist of people that have collaborated together and discussed and developed a program, and then it's the program that gets elected if you're in an election, not an individual, but the program that gets elected. And the individual is responsible to the group.
Yeah.
I don't follow, I don't oppose or support any individual. No individual is responsible for a problem, no individual can solve the problem.
Yeah, that's what in Spanish we call caudillismo. It's one leader. No, we all are capable to to do things and to have collective decisions. Isn't it better if we all decide here what to do and how long I should be talking here instead of me deciding that? So it is there are other ways to do things, and And I just feel like they believe the state is very paternalistic. You know, a state is going to solve all the problems. We delegate our responsibilities to, you know, the politicians sometimes, when we should be taking care of that. So one thing we also start to challenge ourselves, and we start to rethink once we have recovered the public company in Cochabamba. It's like, what does mean public? Is it public when it belongs to the state? You know, when a board of directors decide what to do, or is public when we decide about that? You know, and I feel like the people in Cochabamba have been saying, we want to decide about it. You know, we want our decisions to be taken and put it there. So I was talking with you today about that, and when she was saying, you know, we were talking about this thing that happened in Cochabamba, and I told her, I don't think it was about water at the end. It was about democracy. You know, it was about people, you know, having a say on the issues that are affecting to them. You know, it's about that. It's about the right to decide. And I think in the case of water, I think everybody wants to decide, and everybody should be deciding. We shouldn't put, you know, the decisions of that in the hands of, you know, a board of directors or representatives. You know, we should be, how as a community can get more involved in that. And I think there are thousands of ways to do that. And people in Cochabamba, that 60% are doing that. You know, they have their own mechanisms. They get together once a month. They talk about that. You know, it's and you know, these water committees that sometimes are organized because they don't have any water. It's not because they have water, but because they don't have any water. So it's, you know, they have been starting to mobilize also for other issues. You know, not just about water, but about, you know, extraction of, you know, gas or oil or health, privatization of health or education, you know. And anyway, it's all interconnected. Yeah.
Where some of the workers in Cochabamba working for their public water department?
Yes. There is you know, when we're talking about public sector workers, I feel like sometimes the public sector workers, they see themselves as employees, but they don't see how huge is the responsibility that they have in their hands. So I feel like, and that's actually something that we don't have in Cochabamba, or we don't have in Bolivia. You know, we don't have this public sector thinking how important their role is. You know, they are there because they get a pay, and that's it. But they don't see that there is a yeah, and also they have a huge responsibility. You know, they are delivering a service to the people.
Do they have a union?
There is a union, yes, but they were pro-privatization also, and they didn't want to, you know, because the companies come like that too. They scare the workers. You know, it's like, okay, are you opposed to that? We're going to kick you out from here. And privatization has a huge impact on workers, because the first thing that the companies do, you know, when they privatize a company, they kick out workers, because that's the easiest way to reduce costs. So they kick out a lot of workers. So there's enough proof of that, you know, that the first ones to suffer when something is privatized are the workers. And the World Bank and the IDB have these very interesting indicators about how efficient is a company. And they put, like, for one worker for 5 families or something like that. You know, they have like, so if the company, for example, has more workers than they should, you know, than their references, so it's not a good company, you know. And I think it's wrong. It's a wrong vision. We should have more, you know, it's not like, okay, we want to create a lot of bureaucracy, but you know, what they are not seeing is that some of the, you know, like I was explaining in the case of Mexico, you know, like they are putting away certain parts in order to comply with those references from the World Bank and the IDB. Sometimes the public sector also kicks out a lot of workers to, you know, to fit into those indicators. So it's, you know, labor issues are very much related to, you know, what happens with privatization and, you know, what, yeah.
Well, just an aside, in Schenectady, New York, nearby here, about 15 years ago. A professional services group, which was a French company, came into town. They took over the wastewater treatment plant and privatized that, which was very controversial. And the union followed them and had another small bargaining unit there. They were still in the water department, and there was CSCA and AFSCME and PEF, and they opposed the privatization of the aquifer and met with the politicians. And the unions were very involved. I was a representative of the AFSCME unit. And we were able to convince the politicians not to privatize because the water department was actually bringing in $400,000 a year revenue from providing water to people. So it was actually good for the city, but they were going to pay them millions of dollars to get the water rights, and they wanted to use that to get out of their debt. So fortunately, there was a lot of anti-privatization sentiment in the union, and they had seen with the sanitation that they decreased the number of workers, but also our workforce, if they're in the public sector, generally have better health insurance, better pensions. So the workers don't want to lose that, and they know they're going to lose that if they go.
So many, yeah. So, for example, Bechtel, who went to, after us, he went to Ecuador, and they got Guayaquil. In Guayaquil, the water provision in Guayaquil, they sort of, I don't understand very much this. I don't know how to explain it, but they got sort of insurance from the World Bank against uprisings. So it was like, okay, if there is an uprising, well, at least we are gonna live with some money still, So they, have been becoming also creative, trying to find ways. I don't think there are, many coming into our countries because, we have been kicking them out. But they are, I feel like there are a lot of here. They are more in the north where people are not, enough organized. And again, it's
a lot of apathy.
Yes. And again, they are looking into other things like Nestle, for example, privatizing water sources, putting, water in bottles. And so they are seeing this as it's a good income. Who doesn't need water? Mm-hmm. So it's, it's a good, I guess if I will be investor, I will, put some money into that because it seems profitable. And but we should be looking into these other ways, of how privatization is coming into our countries. It's not just water utilities, but it's water bottle and other things. Yes.
It's interesting. The World Bank has an interest in stopping rebellions or revolutions. This means they also have interest in sending out spies, militias, whatever, to put it down.
Yeah. Yes.
Is the good living that Nancy mentioned kind of related to, I guess the big question is, you're in a world economy, and which runs on copper and oil, and so is this trying to step away from the extractive industries or something, the good living thing?
I have to be very honest about this Vivir Bien. I never heard about that before Morales. And some people talk about that as a, because people the indigenous people and people in the Andes do not talk about things, do not name things. They do it. They live that way. So, I don't know if you have heard about this notion of the commons, for example. In Bolivia, we do that all the time. We are managing our own stuff. We manage our commons all the time, and the fights that we have are for the commons. We want to keep things in common, but we don't call them the commons. So we don't, we do it, but we don't think, that fits into this category. So I think that category just came out with Morales. It was Morales who put it out, and which I think explains very well what communities are doing there. But I don't think it just goes, beyond. I don't think it's just about extractivism and all of that, but it's more about, it goes, it's an anti-system thing. It's to how we can get out of this system that we, how can we? It's so hard to imagine living outside of where we are right now. It's so hard, and I feel like these ideas at least let us think that there are other ways, that we can live in a different way. And I think the old socialist ideas, that we have to go from capitalism to socialism, I don't think that fits anymore also. It's not about going from A to B. It's about what we do in the middle. It's the process. It's what we're doing right now, in this minute, in order to change things and to improve things and in order to live better. So I feel like our struggle should be put it in those terms. Like right now, what we are doing right now. Not thinking, okay, how we're gonna get to to here, and because that also is gonna discourage us. Yes.
But the capitalist class in Latin America has not gone away, right?
No.
I mean, they're still there, and they wouldn't mind taking power directly again, would they? If they could?
No, absolutely not. I think they're waiting, but I also don't feel like, I think we are going to have, in Bolivia, we're going to have elections next year, and I think Morales will win. But I don't think he's going to win because what he's doing, but more because there's no alternative. We don't want to go back to, right? I don't know. We don't want to, but I don't want to go back to the right wings. I don't want to, I feel fear of that. But at the same time, I don't think we should focus on this type of politics anymore. Because again, there has been enough empirical evidence that we can't change things that way. It doesn't matter who's in power. It's Obama or George Bush or Morales. Things are the same. That's what I'm seeing it everywhere. So it's not about those type of politics. I feel like we have to do other types of politics. One's based on ourselves. In communities. I feel like that's where we have to be putting our eyes. That's why when we're working in this little thing called public utility partnership, because I feel like there are more interesting things there, and I feel like we can, there are problems there too, but there are more satisfaction in that job than looking into politics. It's so sad. But yeah, they are waiting there in their turn, and but I feel also like a lot of if they are at some point they are gonna articulate to take power again, it's gonna be not because they are strong or they are better, but because people like Morales are making a lot of mistakes, and are concentrating power instead of giving that to the people.
You didn't mention anything about the decline of the water. Like, how much is the water, part of this is a desperation in many parts of the world, but in Latin America a lot too, because of the drying up of the glaciers and the effects of global warming. So how much of this crisis do you envision will be increasing as a result of the fact that water is becoming more and more scarce?
Yeah, it's not just that glaciers are disappearing also, but a lot of that comes from pollution also. We're polluting, industries are polluting all the time our water sources, and so there is the issue of water is very complex. We can't see it just from one side. What I tried to show you tonight is just a tiny thing compared to other things that we should be looking into that. And climate change is an issue, and that's affecting already. There are parts in Latin America that have a lot of water, and there are other parts that not. And there are many questions about public investment also. From where we're gonna get the money to improve, or to make water accessible to the people, and all of that. So there are environmental issues that, yes, we can't deny, that's happening already. But there are also, political, economical issues that we should be looking into more detail. But again, the region is not just there are several problems happening in different regions. We cannot, uniformize and say, this is what's going to happen there or this is what's going on. But it touches certain parts also of Latin America. I don't know if you have heard, for example, about the Guarani aquifer. That's another huge thing happening in Latin America, and nobody's paying too much attention. But there are a lot of water sources here in this transboundary place, and there are a lot of military bases there, for example, and U.S. bases, that are there according to themselves too, because there is a lot of terrorist activity, because there are many calls that have been made from there to certain dangerous parts, but we all think they are there because of water. So there are all these, I think if we put, a map where we see, for example, military bases and aquifers, we can see that many of them probably overlap. So anyway, yeah, environmental things are also an issue to take into account. Yeah, climate change. Yeah. Well, I think I have talked too much.
I was unhappy that the president of Ecuador said that he was going to have to go to these extraction companies because he didn't get money from contributions from countries around the world that were supposed to supply money so that he could save the Amazon area and not have to do that. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, it's the Yasuni Park. So it was this very innovative idea, right? That that people in the north should pay, to keep those things in the ground, which it was a brilliant idea. Didn't last very much because there is a lot of pressure, and I don't think Correa was very straight since the beginning in relationship to that. I don't trust politicians. But there is a lot of petitions right now circulating. I just saw a letter from 173, I think, academics in the world, Naomi Klein's there, and other very important people asking him to keep his word, and keep that where it should be, under the ground. People in Ecuador are mobilizing around that too. They're calling for a referendum to decide what to do, because Ecuadorians are the ones that should decide, what is best for them. And but I feel like that's gonna be, a struggle. I don't think Correa easily is gonna be able to do that, because people are not going to let him, but also it's going to be very hard for people, to try to keep Correa outside of that national park. So it's good to keep an eye on that and, try to be supportive with what's happening there. One thing that Correa has been doing a lot is trying to eliminate, because, there are these conventions about indigenous peoples, that they have the same, and they have to decide about what's happening there. But usually, Correa and also Morales in Bolivia have been, trying, is the OIT, right? Convention on Indigenous People, that have been not trying to, to pass these consultations and referendums in relationship to that. Anyway, I feel like people, the CONAIE is such a strong indigenous movement, and they are so well articulated. I think there's a good chance that Correa won't obstruct the Yasuni. That's my hope, and I feel like there's a good chance that people will stop that. Well, thank you. Sorry,